Okay, I think we'll get started. So I just want to take a moment to welcome everyone to a conversation with one of our current fellows, Genevieve Gaignard, and Jon Gray from the culinary collective Ghetto Gastro. This has been a long-awaited conversation for so many different reasons, and I'm really excited to have both of them here. I want to start off by saying that, it is always wonderful, especially now, to be able to gather in place. And this is a very special and important place. And I want us to always make sure that we keep in mind that we acknowledge the lands that we're on, the land of the Wabanaki people. Welcome, everyone. And we want to express our respect for the indigenous communities who have lived here for many, many generations. We recognize the legacies of settler colonialism, and we commit to building relationships with the Wabanaki. The Lunder Institute for American Art takes this commitment very seriously, and we will work to create a living acknowledgement that visibly shows this commitment and its accountability through our words and our actions. And so as I introduce our guests, I really hope that we think about all of these conversations that we have as our actions and our commitment to coming together in place. I am going to start out with welcoming first Jon Gray, who is on our stage, and I feel as though this microphone is causing a lot of sound, so I'm going to move this a little bit. And first of all, I want to talk about why I invited Jon Gray to be in conversation with Genevieve Gaignard. It's very specific to me that there's something that comes along with conversation that comes from friends and colleagues. But what's very important to me about what they share is this importance of creating new narratives. And the narrative really stems from the intersection of their practices, but also how their practices intersect so many different disciplines within the arts, and specifically culinary arts and visual arts. And I just want to acknowledge how important these sorts of conversations and discourse can be in the work that they do to not just educate, but to empower people, not just in the community, but with the community. So I'm going to start out by introducing our guest, Jon Gray. Jon Gray is a curator, entrepreneur, and co-founder of the Bronx-born culinary collective called Ghetto Gastro. Jon Gray aims to shift social narratives, blending background and fashion to create immersive experiences, product design, and unique storytelling. From the co-op city, Gray's mother and grandmother taught him about the arts and challenged him to innovate as a way of life. When a rebellious adolescence almost put him behind bars, Gray used the experience to imagine a greater vision for himself. Inventorying these passions and pastimes, he made Bronx-driven gastro diplomacy his career and mission. In 2019, Gray delivered his noteworthy TED Talk, and Gray is a civic practice partnership artist in residence at the Metropolitan Museum of Art. And in 2021, he served as a guest curator at the Cooper Hewitt Smithsonian Design Museum, where, quote, Jon Gray of Ghetto Gastro selects, featured an Afrofuturist theme. He's an avid art collector and a people connector. Welcome, Jon Gray. And now for Genevieve Gaignard. Genevieve is a multidisciplinary artist who uses self-portraiture, collage, sculpture, and installation to elicit dialogue around the intricacies of race, beauty, and cultural identity. Referencing regional and historical events, as well as a personal archive as a biracial woman, Gaignard creates environments that teeter between symbolic and autobiographical realms. She clearly interrogates notions of skin privilege while challenging viewers to look more closely at racial realities. The ensemble of her work shatters viewers' perceptions of culture and race, compelling them to piece together novel ways of perceiving the world and their place in it. Gaignard received her BFA in photography from the Massachusetts College of Design and her MFA in photography from Yale University. She splits her time between her hometown of Orange, Massachusetts, and Los Angeles, California. In 2019, Gaignard Gaignard debuted 6 solo exhibitions and participated in numerous countrywide group shows. Last year, she presented 2 solo exhibitions, To Whom It May Concern with Rowan University Art Gallery and Strange Fruit with Bellmetter in Los Angeles. Her work appears in numerous and notable institutions, from the Broad in Los Angeles to the Studio Museum in Harlem, New York. In July of 2020, Gaignard partnered with Orange Barrel Media on Look at Them, Look at Us, a permanent site-specific public art installation in downtown Atlanta. If you haven't seen it, you should definitely go take a look. So with this, I welcome Genevieve Gaignard. Thank you. Thanks for both clapping. Okay, so I'm going to start off this conversation again in the context of how both Jon and Genevieve broaden narratives. And what I am most interested in is how they define what we know to exist and perceive to be true, but what we regard to truly be race, identity, community, and histories. And so I'm going to start off the conversation with a simple, how did you two meet?
We might have conflicting answers. I'll let Genevieve go first.
Always the best question.
I remember meeting you at a solo show I did at Flag Arts Foundation in New York City, and you rolled up with our mutual friend Kennedy Yanko, and that was kind of how it started, as I remember. How about you?
I remember meeting Genevieve in Miami, I think during Basel before that show, through Kennedy, so that we could both agree on Kennedy, but I feel like we met at Soho House in Miami Beach.
Yeah, I think I'm trying to forget that because I remember tripping and like falling. It had nothing to do with you, but you know.
I caught her.
Yeah, that's when the friendship started.
So what happened in Miami stays in Miami, basically?
I guess,
Okay.
not anymore.
So I think, obviously, so it was in the context of a visual art experience. And both of you obviously understand how the impact of visual arts really affects so many different areas. And, you know, in the work that you do to build and sustain these narratives that you broaden and offer, what have you found in the work that you do around these new narratives, these ideas? And so, for instance, Genevieve, when you talk about the idea of perceiving what is Blackness, and then Jon, when you talk about redefining the word ghetto, these are ways in which we think innovatively about even something as simple as text and language. There are a couple of quotes in the book that is taking the world by storm, and that is Ghetto Gastro's Black Power Kitchen, which is not just a cookbook, but to me, I think is an amalgamation of collective and its experiences, but also conversations with people across disciplines. And I think to me that stems a little bit from the idea of how you use this idea of innovation and new narratives as vehicles. So could each of you share with us, again, how have you felt that your work to create these new narratives or broaden stories, how has it been most effective? What is the impact? What have you seen?
Am I starting?
Absolutely.
A gentleman. I guess it's kind of this ongoing transformation that I'm taking on too, as I see people responding to the work. It kind of just started as a way for me to kind of work out my own issues and like understanding the complexities of it. And when I just started to like stand in it and own kind of my Blackness, I just kind of stopped overthinking it, I guess. And I wanted to kind of fill in the blanks of the narratives that were told that are kind of this systemic story that's kind of ongoing. And I just kind of like poking at that and kind of backtracking and filling in the blanks that we often don't get to see and talk about.
Yeah. Jon?
Yeah, like to piggyback of what Genevieve's saying is just like our own exploration, excavation, and I think the way the work resonates, you know, I think Marcel Duchamp might have said something like, 50% of making art is your job and the other 50% is the viewer's job. So oftentimes when we're approaching the work, it's really approaching it from a place of selfishness. Like, what are we making that we want to exist in the world that's not available for us? And if other people are rocking with it, they rock with it. But in terms of the work resonating, I think the real benefit and what makes it meaningful for me, and I'm sure my partners as well, is when we see how it inspires others to take action, to use their gifts and the tools that they have in hand to tell stories, reinforce or change narratives within their communities, and because we truly believe community builds community. So it's like for us, by us, and that's how we approach the game.
I think one of the things that really strikes me too, and you mention it in the book, and Genevieve, we've talked a lot about it through your work, is the idea of really addressing the need to unlearn a lot of what we've learned. I think in the Black Power Kitchen, Jon, you even you and the collective even reference what we learn through our history books or what we don't learn, the concept of filling in the blanks. And I wonder, when you both do your work, whether it's through culinary arts and working with a design company, or working with fashion, or Genevieve through collage, what are some of the things that strike you most, in addition to the use of language or text, that really works to help people to think about the unlearning process? You know, what is it that you feel really works to engage people? And it might be something to you that, you know, is a source of inspiration or motivation in your work. But when you really feel about that concept of changing the narrative, it is a lot, what I hear is this unlearning or filling in the gaps. And so is there something that you use as a source of inspiration or motivation in your work to kind of address that?
I'll start here. So yeah, when it comes to us doing unlearning, I think most of that work is guided and inspired by, you know, the Black women in our lives. Like all of us are raised by brilliant Black women, our mentors, our friends. It's no accident that like I'm here with Genevieve, because like that's like our community and who wraps around us and gives us the knowledge that we need to, you know, be better. And then I think a lot of the work at Ghetto Gastro that we do is challenging perceptions and forcing people to unlearn or rethink stereotypical modules or modes of thinking that they may have. So like when we're getting off a plane in Milan, you know, to do a project or to even maybe meet with the consulate or the prime minister or something like that in the country, like they often think we're there to rap or the DJ or the, you know what I mean? So when we talk about like we're there to do some culinary gastro diplomacy, I think it's going to plant a seed in them to think differently about what they see or what they think when they see people that present themselves as we do or show up as we do, you know, with the skin bags that we have. So yeah, I think it's also fun to just challenge those perceptions. Like even from TED, like I think in my TED talk, like I went to TED as a visitor a year before I did my TED talk, and somebody approached me in the hallway like, "Oh, are you one of the musicians?" And I kind of called them out in my TED talk, but yeah, so it's like an interesting thing when you could challenge some of these stereotypes and show that, you know, Blackness is not a monolithic experience. It's blurriness and it's a lot to uncover within the realm.
Damn.
Yeah, that's good. How about you?
I think it's just, you know, feeding off each other and the community that we've kind of built, and through conversation, kind of knowing what is missing. And I don't know, I feel Jon's doing something on like a larger scale. I'm a little bit more quiet in the way that I get the message out there. And it's beautiful that like he'll loop me into what he's doing if he sees a strength in what the work is saying to like further his message as well, or both of our messages.
Yeah, I feel like the work in your work, Genevieve, we've talked about this several times, and that you have a tendency to have the ability to draw people into your work. And there are so many layers, but the draw is a very innocent, unsuspecting image, and then suddenly the gravity of the situation really comes through, or the conveying of the idea. And I think that speaks to what Jon is talking about with regard to the stereotypes, that they are prevalent and they are unconscious even at times. But then if you really look closely, they are there and have always been there. And so a lot of that unlearning comes from that. There is a line in the Power Kitchen in your introduction that I have a tendency to really talk about when I think about art history and the arts. I always reference this idea of myth of absence, and the idea that Black folks, all folks have always been here, they will always be here, but it is a question of what is illuminated, what is documented, and what is archived in order for us to see all people. And one of the things that you mentioned about the concept of ghetto really speaks to that. And I think it also speaks to what you look at when you see Genevieve's work, when you talk about ghetto. Ghetto isn't about excluding people, it's about telling the rest of the world, we are here, we've been here. We're going to serve what we feel like dishing out, especially when many fail to acknowledge our existence. And I feel that those couple of lines really speak to this idea of, in everything that you see, whether it's culinary arts, whether it's fashion, whether it's visual arts, we have always been there. And the idea of how you create those different entry points has to be interdisciplinary. There's no way other than what you are doing to look at it holistically. And so it sounds as though there are a lot of strides that you've made through your work, but I'm curious, it sounds like there are things that are effective, but what have you found to be most challenging through your practice, through your work, working through Ghetto Gastro, working as a visual artist? What are some of the things that have posed some of the biggest challenges that we may not be privy to?
I think I'm gonna give you a few because there's so many challenges, right? So I think personally, focus is a challenge because like how we do Ghetto Gastro and the reason why it's so multidisciplinary and interconnected is because we really created a platform that gives us excuse and license to do all the things we want to do and work with everybody we want to work with and explore. The tricky thing about success, right, is that sometimes when you get noticed or you get some traction and you have to like be places and do things, the servicing the business often could take you away from the dreaming that got you to the point where you wanted to be or whatever. So it's like figuring out how to balance those things to keep dreaming and keep the wonderment and exploring and testing and learning and finding time for that. Also just the emotional burden of doing your life work, and with partners and it's all, we care so much, so it's also personal, right? So yeah, just navigating all of those things are challenges, but it's like champagne problems, right? So I'm not up here complaining, but it's just like the truth. Learning to say no is hard.
I think to sort of side answer that, I'm thinking about the fact that we all learn in different ways, and the cool thing that both what Jon does and what I try and do in my work, it's like I'm using different mediums because I know that like maybe through one form of way of working, it might not hit for a particular person. So I'm just trying to expand on like all the different ways you can enter this story, which is challenging based on like just hoping that people are getting through, but through conversation and just, taking time with the work and the people that are experiencing the work is kind of the benefit of learning where the work needs to go next.
It's interesting, the parallels between the two. And one of the reasons I ask, because sometimes when we think about artists and their lives and creatives, especially when they garner a lot of attention or quote unquote success, I think whether you're a visionary or a visual artist or a culinary artist, there is a perception that everything is great. You've got it made. It's all done. You know, let's call it a day. And I think to your point, Jon, and I know that we've talked about this with visual artists, a lot of times when they hit a certain level of success, it's for a certain type of work, right? And so sometimes you often find yourself associated specifically with that and then able to break out, which then takes away from that creativity that brought you to that place. But then also the idea that, you know, as we like to say in our conversations, the hustle continues. It's not over. It's really never over. I don't think for any artist it is ever over, right? But that is, I don't know, the nature of the beast, the thrill of the game, but it does become more and more difficult. But then I think that probably speaks to the reason why the two of you intersect and your lives intersect, and that it helps to broaden what it is you do in your practice.
Yeah.
So I'm interested, for the sake of the audience and people that are here with us online, what do successful intersections look like for you within your practice? Whether it is collaborations with other people, whether it is within your work that you found success, like what are the intersections that have really, what do they look like, and what has worked for you when you think about crossing and spanning mediums and disciplines? What does that look like for us here when you describe that in your practice?
I mean, this cookbook is a great example of that, for me at least. But the friendship that Jon and I have built over the years, like he can call me and he's doing a project. I don't really have to know anything about it, and I'll show up for the most part. And, you know, it's just like the trust and like learning a lot from the work that Ghetto Gastro has done just overall, and just seeing how they bring people together in this really unique way is, great picture.
Got the toes out.
And Jon also shows up for my stuff to, you know, to show that it's like, it's back and forth for sure. I don't think I'm answering your question. I'm sorry.
Nah, you did a great job. I think for me, when I think about collaboration and the nature of finding collaborators, it's really a spiritual, energetic thing. At least how I approach it, right? So it's like, when you spend so much of your life working and noodling and trying to make things and do things and put good things into the world, like you want the people that you're in the trenches with, you want to actually like them. Like you want them to be folks that you down to go to dinner with, or like you can share hardships with. And so for me, it always starts with, do we like each other? All right, cool. Oh, you do dope shit? I think we do dope shit. Can we do more dope shit together? All right, check. Let's do it. And then just start tinkering and exploring and having fun. Like, so I think it's always just a natural, and like, let it be organic. You know, oftentimes people have ideas and they look at, like, somebody, like a new producer might be like, oh, I got to get this beat on Drake's album. But it's like they're overlooking the people next to them in their class or in their neighborhood. And it's really like, it's such a beautiful thing when you get to grow and level up with your comrades together. So for us to be able to ascend in community, it's like no better feeling than being able to have the conversations like, remember when, you know? So I really love that part of collaborating and community building and, you know, causing good trouble with co-conspirators.
That sounds like a fun job. Like that. You know, one of the reasons why I feel that it is so relevant to have this conversation in the context of an institute that is dedicated to American art is because the work that you both do reflects the changing identity experience of a very complex American experience, right? And I think within this cookbook alone, you have illustrated and represented and reflected the diversity within your neighborhood and within the Black community. But that is just, but then you've taken it globally. But when we bring it back to what it means to be American and how that is reflected in the work that comes out that is a product or creates American art, I'm curious for you, when you think about the work that you do, you know, you've had so many amazing conversations with artists, the Astor Gates. You've talked with Kimberly Drew, all of these people who work within institutions that deal with American art and have questions about the history of America that comes through their work, their own experience. And with this particularly, talking about the history of food, Black food within our community and how that helps us to understand what our history is as Americans, as Black folks, all of that. I'm curious, and I will reference, I remember watching you, Jon, on, you know I love my TikTok, but I was watching you and you were going through the Met. I think you had done the tour at the Met with the book. And I think that you were going through the antiquities collection there, and you were talking about the vases, and you were talking about how they were used and the ingredients that were used. And so I think it's important for us to understand the historic significance of understanding art history, that to me too is also part of creating this narrative. And I think for us at the Institute, it is really important to think about reflecting on that history to understand where we are, but then to inform where we can go. And so I'm curious for the both of you, when you think about that in terms of American art, American history, American experience, how is that significant to the work that you do?
Well, I think it comes back to the unlearning kind of question. When you go through these spaces, or a lot of the spaces that, you know, artists my age and beyond, older, and just like the work that we've been shown didn't look like us, and it wasn't our stories. So I guess unlearning the fact that this is how it is, this is the only way it is, and then playing a major catch up to fill in the blanks for all the folks' stories that have not been included. And it's kind of a scary thing to take on. I mean, not necessarily for the people making, but the people that are supposed to like include and fill in the blanks. We're just out here continuously making, and hopefully it gets in the right spaces that can, you know, share the reality of American history.
We're going to be in conversation with
Totally.
what is in the space.
Exactly. Yeah.
Jon?
What Genevieve said, I think, yeah, like when we're looking at institutions and who controls narratives, I think it's definitely important to disrupt the status quo. Because like you said, it's like they say the person that wins the war writes the story, or you know what I mean? So there's so many things that are like left out in terms of our history. Like I didn't learn about Mansa Musa or like the Doheny in like growing up, you know, we had to learn on our own, like, and having my mother give me books like Asada or the autobiography of Malcolm X, which really led me down a path to want to just learn more about my history. And I think the dilemma about being Black in America is like, you're Black first here, right? But then when you go abroad, you're American first. So it's like this weird kind of push and pull of identity that you're faced with when you if you have the privilege of traveling and reconciling it. So I think it's paramount that we're included. And like the antiquities, I was looking at it's this gentleman, David Drake, AKA Potter Dave, and he was the enslaved man in Edgefield, South Carolina. And he was doing these poetry pots, but they were like utilitarian objects. So the pot that you were speaking of was something that they stored or preserved pork and beef in. But the fact that this gentleman was an enslaved man that knew how to read and write was radical on its own. So it's like different types of soft power and figuring out how do we shift narratives in a way that's sustainable and long lasting. I think it's key to the work that Genevieve and Ghetto Gastro are taking up.
You know, I think to your point, John, and what we've been talking about is this idea of he'd been having access to all of the narratives, all of the stories, and I think that definitely speaks to both of the work. And how do you actually how do you engage people in that, everyone in that? And I think, again, it speaks to how both of you have done that through your work. I wonder, when we talk about communities and learning, you know, there are I don't know, different stories, but I think the idea is, how do we know what we don't know, right? It's always a matter of, I talk to artists, I talk to students, it's like, oh, I didn't know that. And to move forward, it's very difficult if you don't know what you don't know. And so it does really talk about the importance of education and expanding and having access. And I guess my question for you is, when you think about what is, knowing what you don't know, what do you think we should know that we don't know?
She's wrapping up here.
I got, it took me all talk to think about this answer, but I got one. I think what we don't know is that we're the shit, and we've been told so many lies, and our contributions have been undervalued, our communities have been underinvested in, and we're just underestimated in generally. So I think knowing that, we have value, and that's part of the reason why, Ghetto Gastro is named Ghetto Gastro, not just because it's provocative and it gets the people going. It's also because it's like, all right, how do we take this base level of something that's supposed to mean, or quote unquote negative, however you're looking at it, but then you apply this level of, I guess, premium luxury because it's coming at a significantly high price point, because so many people correlate value with GDPs and economics. So it's like, it's a mindfuck, part of my language. And it really gets the point across, So it's like, I think us to know that we have the power, the creators have the power, people in these underestimated communities have power. It's just like, we really just have to get together and use the resources and share knowledge and share resources to create systemic change, because at the end of the day, the enemy is not going to save us, So that's my 2 cents.
Through the work that we do, it is that constant reminder to the folks that don't know, that reminder that we are here and our stories are important. And yeah.
Well, our stories, everyone's interested in learning new stories. And I think the stories are, as I said, I don't necessarily think of them as new, but yet a different way of illuminating the stories that have always existed, and to create a space for everyone to be involved in that. I think we will open it up to questions from either audience or folks who are with us on Zoom. If you have any questions for Jon or Genevieve, you can either raise your hand here. Oh, we have one already.
Oh, great.
Thank you. Thank you both. I want to ask a question, I guess, more specific to some of the content in the book. I have not read the book, I'm sorry if the answer is in there. But I was wondering if any of, I guess, the theoretical or maybe if the question of accessibility to organic food, quote unquote, or the presence of food deserts that disproportionately affects Black and Brown communities in the US, is that covered at any length, or are there parts of the book that integrate the discussion of that problem? Because I feel like it's very important to the discussion of food and race, especially in the US, but all over the globe. So.
Yeah, y'all can hear me, right? Yeah, we definitely address it in our work and in the book. We talk, being in the Bronx, from the Bronx, you know, I'm in the Bronx today. It's the home of the largest food distribution center of its kind in the world when you're talking about fish, produce, dairy, all of these things. But yet it's extremely food insecure. So, and we use the term food apartheid because we feel like food desert, you know, implies that it's a natural occurrence, whereas when you talk about apartheid, it's definitely a system that's designed to affect people differently. So, long answer to say yes, we do broach this topic in Black Power Kitchen. So cop a few copies, run it up, trickle a nickel. You did.
I'll let you know there's somebody who's gonna win a book tonight. Depends on where you're sitting. Okay. We have a question from our virtual community. How do you stay committed to the values of community while negotiating the culture of competition inherent in the art world?
I guess that's for me, but I don't really overthink that stuff. If I did, then I wouldn't probably make what I make, you know? I have to make what just feels pressing and important to speak on, and I do it in my own unique way. And if I worried what, you know, how it was going to read beyond that, yes, I have to like make a living off of this at the end of the day, but that doesn't make me not make the work that I make.
Yeah.
I'll piggyback on that, and I think it's just making sure you have a abundance mindset. It's like what's for you is what's for you. The most important thing is to be true to you and put out what resonates and what you feel like the world needs, or else you're just making shit, you know? So I think that's the most important bit. And then your tribe will come. It might take a month, it might take a decade, like us, you know, but if you keep putting the work in, the people gonna come.
Yeah, I think probably each of you have your own sort of compass that you use to maybe determine how you do your work or the direction of your work. But I think that question probably speaks to a whole different conversation with regard to the context in which you work. And that, you know, I think in both of you have spoken to that. There are, I think, inherent challenges to that, but I think the nature of the work that you do as creatives, there is some sort of competition, you know, but I think that that's part of also, you know, the kind of system in which you're working, right? And so when you create your work and you think about, I guess, this idea of being a creative and pursuing this journey, and maybe this is for some people that are thinking about pursuing this as a career option, what is it that keeps, you know, or that kept you on this path? Because it's not for the faint of heart. I think that question is what that's speaking to. And, you know, I think a lot of the pursuits within the arts, you know, it does have its sort of narratives around it in terms of its stability or its place in the world and that sort of thing. What is it that keeps you or kept you on this path to be a visual artist, to stay within the arts, to, you know, to go out on, because for the most part, you are on your own. You do your work. You are entrepreneurs.
Mhm.
What keeps you going with
I
that?
think it's less about the competition part.
Mhm.
If you've got like a strong community of people, I feel like at least I feel lucky enough to have a good crew of people that are like, we're lifting each other up. We like want all of our things to make it. So we show up for each other in whatever ways best support, like sharing their stories. And so, yeah, I try not to think of it in a competitive sense.
Mhm.
Although that's, you know, it's like something you can't avoid, but if you overthink it, you kind of trip over it. And it kind of keeps you from your goal.
Right.
Yeah.
Sean?
He's out.
Yeah.
Was I supposed to answer this one too?
You're more in the world of, I don't know. I mean, you're in all different parts of it, though. I mean, you're creating. You are creating platforms in which, you know, there is commerce, and it's not just. I mean, you know, you're giving some of that back to the community. And I mean, there's a lot to, I think, to manage and to juggle for you in all of the different work that you do. Is that what keeps it exciting for you, or is that part of the challenge?
It keeps it exciting, but it's like the gift and I guess the curse, right? And I blame it on my neurology, ADHD. It's like I gotta stick and move. And like with Genevieve, like I don't have a choice. Like if this shit didn't work, I'm calling the cartel back. You know what I'm saying? So it's like that's how we giving it up, you know?
But I think he's also doing something that there's not a lot of people doing. So
Yes.
it's not a competition. Everyone's watching him, like, and his crew, like, to see what's happening next, I feel like.
There is a really, and I paraphrase this quote in the introduction, but you had said something in the book, John, to create and innovate is to take a non-traditional path. And I think that is very, very true. I think the idea of creating something that you feel to be needed, to be worth it, does require you to do something unconventional or non-traditional. And I think that's part of the power of the work that you both do. And then another quote that it was part of something that I had read was, gatekeepers reduce the story to one thing. And I thought that was perfect, because it is so much more than a moment. It's so much more than one thing. But gatekeepers, we need less gatekeepers and more gateways, right? And I think that is the idea behind your work, and how you engage people and draw people is the strength of what you do. Are there any other questions that we have in the audience or on the, oh, we do have another one? Okay. When dealing with the embracing and highlighting of our identity and individualism, in parentheses, Blackness, what are your thoughts on, and how important would you say it is to blur the lines to build community when necessary, being that Blackness isn't monolithic?
That's from my homie James. Shout out to James. I think, yeah, Blackness isn't monolithic in terms of like, it's so many different ways to be Black. But I also think it's a spiritual thing that you feel, at least I feel, like when I go to West Africa and I might not speak the language, but it's just a rhythm, like where you feel it. So I think even just humanity, like we have more in common than differences, but I think we have different ideas and different priorities on ways to approach it. So I do think lines could be blurred to create community, you know, and I think they often are. You know, you go to the barbecue, you look at your own family, and you have so many shades and so many way of being in your family. For mine, as an example, you got my aunt who was the chancellor at the university in Kentucky, and my father was her brother who was illiterate, right, and did drugs. Like, and then another person just from that same household is a lawyer, and another is another type of criminal I'm not going to name. But it's just so many ways of being, and I think that maybe that's unique to the Black experience in America. Maybe it's not, or the Black experience internationally. But you know, to tap in with James and with B would say, it's like really about us as humans and seeing the humanity in each other and connecting on that level.
I'm just sitting up here like one blurred line.
I feel like we have definitely explored and we have a clear understanding of how important the story and the narrative is. And I think that this is a conversation that we can definitely resume. And I'm hoping at one point, Jon Gray will bring his collaborators with him and he will visit Colby. But I want to thank you, Jon, for spending this evening with us. And I want to thank you, Genevieve Gaignard, for also being in conversation with us. And thanks to all of you for joining us. If you have not, if you don't follow, you should follow Ghetto Gastro if you can keep up with them, and Genevieve Gaignard if you can keep up with her on Instagram and their social media. But as I had promised, this book is going to go to a lucky person who has a sticky underneath their chair that says winner, and you will definitely be delighted. So thanks to everyone. Thanks to Jon. Thanks to Genevieve. And thanks to all of you for joining us.
Thanks for having me. Appreciate it.